you go ahead? There we go. Put up the next one. That's the lyric. All right, the next one. Next slide is the lyrics. Well, they put that up. So, why did she write this song? What is this song about? It's autobiographical. Where did she grow up? Butcher Holler, probably West Virginia. What is the purpose of the song? What are the elements of the song that give it purpose? Nancy?
The love of her father.
And the love of her father. As compared to, now she says, I'm proud to be a coal miner's daughter. Why does she say that?
Humble beginnings.
Humble beginnings. Okay. So in the house that she grew, now some of you it might not be your taste in music, maybe you didn't grow up any place like that, but what can you identify with this song? You were poor. You were poor, but there was love. Family was more important than money. Love was more important than money. The mom and the dad in this song did what? Worked hard. They sacrificed. They didn't complain. Now, obviously, she could have told a very different story if she had wanted to, perhaps if her child was different. That she's bitter that she grew up in a no-place town, and her father never had enough money. They had 8 kids, way too many kids. Never should have had that many kids. Couldn't provide adequately for her. Maybe she felt neglected, or you don't hear any of that in this song, do you? What's the message of this song? Now this is 1970, so she's standing there, she's on TV. What's another message that comes through this song? She had humble beginnings, but things have changed. She's grateful. She's grateful for having grown up in a shack. And like at the end of the song, she goes there, and there's nothing there but the floors. Nobody lives there. She's grateful for having grown up in a shack. And now, obviously, things are better for her. Loretta Lynn became a major country music star. This song itself was a huge hit. So, why was this song so popular in 1970? I think a lot of people could identify with it. I know some of you. I'm looking at you, Joanne. Joanne, we talked in Sunday school class. She grew up in Mississippi. Did you grow up in a family of wealth? No. Could you identify with some of the things in this song? Yeah. Family. Yeah. Family love. Even though you were poor, a lot of people can identify with a song like this. Now, the reason I wanted us to look at this song was because in many ways, Deuteronomy chapter 8 is just like this song. And in a couple ways it's different, and we're going to see that. This is Moses again. Israel is about to cross over into the promised land from the wilderness, and Moses is basically giving the last sermons. In the whole book of Deuteronomy, it's the second giving of the law. It's the last sermons, and so Deuteronomy 8 starts like this. As we talked about last week, there's a lot of be careful to obey in the book of Deuteronomy. Be careful to follow every command I am giving you today, so that you may live and increase and may enter and possess the land the Lord promised on oath to your ancestors. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that a man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Your clothes did not wear out, and did not swell during these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Observe the commands of the Lord your God, walking in obedience to him and revering him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with brooks, streams, and deep springs, gushing out into the valleys and the hills, a land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce, and you will lack nothing, a land where the rocks are iron, and you can dig copper out of the hills. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his law, and his decrees that I am giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and your flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and you have multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. He led you through the vast and dreadful wilderness, that thirsty and waterless land, with its venomous snakes and scorpions. He brought you water out of hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the wilderness, something your ancestors had never known, to humble and to test you, so that in the end it might go well with you. You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors, as it is today. So, what do you find to be the same in Deuteronomy as in Loretta Lynn's song, and what do you find to be different in Deuteronomy as in Loretta Lynn's song? Any ideas?
Hope for the future.
Hope for the future for the Israelites. Going through trials, and those trials testing you, developing you, molding you. What's different between the two songs? Because in some ways, Moses' sermon is a song. Gratitude. In one, Loretta Lynn is already in the promised land, and she's already feeling grateful for, and this is ironic, she's feeling grateful for the poverty she endured. Where was the father and the mother in Loretta Lynn's song? They were helpless, in a sense. The father was working in a coal mine and did all the work he could. So at night he went to work in the coal mine. In the day he was working in the fields. We wonder when the poor man slept. Had 8 children. The mother was always washing by hand, having to sew things, trying to keep track of the 8 children. They were poor. But in this story, however, God's position is different. God rescues them out of Egypt, but brings them into the desert, and God himself tests them. It's a different relationship, because whereas the father and the mother of Loretta Lynn could say, I'm just doing the best I can, the Lord obviously has power. And the Lord obviously has options, and the Lord chooses to bring them into the desert to test them, to mold them, and to shape them. And this, I think, for many of us, might cause problems, because we would say, what gives God the right to bring me into the wilderness? If God is able, shouldn't God give me comfort? If God is able, shouldn't God fix all those things in my life that are inconvenient? If God is able, shouldn't God have always given me nice and good things? And then there's the question of why remember. You see, what's interesting about Loretta Lynn's song is she's basically saying, now that I'm a country music star, now that I can be on 1970s TV in this flowing green dress, If you watch the video carefully, you see there's a little TV and it's kind of a living room, and it reminds me of, well, TV programs in the 70s. But I mean, this for 1970, she had reached the peak of her fame. And she obviously, by virtue of this song, became a very wealthy woman. But inherent in the song is this idea, and it's the same thing that's inherent in the text, which is Loretta, in a sense, saying in 1970, if it hadn't been for Butcher Holler and my humble upbringings, I might get lost in this world of wealth and comfort and power. My humble beginnings keeps me rooted in a way. And if I forget today where I came from, I'll be lost for sure. It's very interesting, in fact, if you read chapter 9 as well. Chapter 9 goes more into how Israel behaved in the wilderness. Because Israel, as we know after having gone through all of this, Israel did not behave well in the wilderness. Israel in the wilderness did very natural things. Israel got scared. Israel got grabby. Israel reached for whatever would comfort her immediately or seem to give her security immediately. And in fact, God brings her into the wilderness to develop her and to test her and to raise her and to give her character. And so now, on the cusp of the promised land, Moses is saying to them, God is going to give you this land, and it's a good land. And unlike the wilderness, in this good land, the rain's going to come fairly predictably. And the food is going to grow out of the ground. And the trees are going to bear fruit. And there's going to be minerals that you can use to develop your civilization. And in the promised land, God is in fact going to go in there, and in chapter 9 it talks more about this. God is going to give you farms in fields that you did not clear. And he's going to give you houses that you did not build. And he's going to give you flocks and herds that you did not have to raise up. Why is it that, let's talk about two billionaires. Let's talk about Bill and Melinda Gates. And why Bill and Melinda Gates, Bill is one of the wealthiest men in the world, at some point via Microsoft stock, he had a net worth of somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 to $90 billion. And his desire is to give pretty much all of his money away and not leave it to his children. Why would he do that? Daniel.
Lord Christ could have been loved them, and I could feel very love sometimes.
He tries the people that he loves. The Lord tests them. The Lord understands this dynamic that Loretta Lynn picks up, and he says, I cannot trust you in the promised land if you forget the wilderness. Now what's tricky here is that the Lord is not going to take every generation out of the promised land and bring them into the wilderness. And so what he says is, you need to remember the wilderness in order to live rightly in the promised land. The difficulty that we have here, unlike Loretta Lynn's parents who seemed like victims, is why doesn't God just always give us everything that we need? Now it's very convenient for Loretta Lynn to be standing there up on stage on TV in 1970 singing this song with then probably hundreds of thousands of dollars pouring in, not millions of dollars. And, now reaching stardom, knowing that there are how many others who are still living in the wilderness. Why does she know? How does she remember? How can she be grateful for what happened? It's easier to deal with God, but God also says it's easier to ignore God when times are good. So we must remember. What's interesting is that it's this passage that Jesus cites when Jesus goes into the wilderness. And when Jesus goes into the wilderness and fasts for 40 days, it's voluntary. And in a sense, in this passage in the New Testament, after Jesus is baptized, he goes into the wilderness and he stays there for 40 days and he fasts, and we think, why would Jesus do this? Jesus is doing this to remember the wilderness, to reenact the wilderness, because he knows that he's about to enter a situation where he will be using his power, and his great temptation will be, in fact, as if we could imagine, to forget his Father. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." And Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Deuteronomy 8. So what point is Jesus making? The point he's making is that we are so, as physical creatures, tempted to believe that our life flows from our strength, from our abilities. Our life flows from our opportunities and our ability to secure what we want and what we need around us and to guarantee it. And the wilderness says, no. We imagine we are self-sufficient, but the wilderness teaches us that we are not. Now, obviously, I'm using wilderness as a metaphor. I'm not just talking about going and camping for a weekend up in the hills or something. But I think most of you know what I'm talking about, because there are times in your life when you have been in the wilderness. Or there are times in your life when you will go through the wilderness, when you will go into times and places, you will go into things that you cannot change. There will be difficulties that you cannot fix. There will be relationships that you cannot mend. There will be situations, job situations, family situations, church situations, financial situations, medical situations that you have absolutely no control over. And you look to God and say, why, God, can't you fix this? And then you may read Deuteronomy 8 and even hear, maybe he doesn't want to fix it now for you. Maybe he wants you to be in the wilderness. Maybe he wants you to learn and to grow. But it's really misery. We are easily corrupted by comfort and plenty. If you look at the character of Israel and then transplant them into the promised land and give them strength and give them power and give them self-sufficiency, they will know nothing of God. And even in the wilderness, we are often unfaithful to God and our neighbor, and in it for ourselves. It is funny that on one hand, suffering can make people more noble, and it can bring out the worst in people. And it does both. The strange thing about Jesus is that he freely chooses to go into the wilderness. And the lingering question that we have from Deuteronomy, which is, when we're in the wilderness, and when God isn't fixing things, and when God doesn't seem to be cooperating or coming through with the implicit way that we think he needs to, what does that mean? Does that mean God doesn't care? Does that mean that God doesn't love us? Does that mean that God can't be trusted? And the answer to that question is actually Jesus himself, because Jesus didn't need to come. Jesus didn't need to rescue, but he comes into the wilderness to suffer with us, to suffer for us, and sometimes even to suffer instead of us. And the whole narrative of Jesus is only understood with Deuteronomy in the background. The Jews expected, as would the Romans and the Greeks, that a son of God would come in like Hercules and display mighty power and to be rewarded with comfort and with strength. And instead Jesus comes and he's called by the prophet Isaiah a man of sorrows. And by his stripes we are healed. G.K. Chesterton said this: I would maintain that thanks are the highest form of thought, and that gratitude is happiness doubled by wonder. The Loretta Lynn song works because she's in the promised land. But it also works because the song also reflects, as does Deuteronomy, she basically says, I could not live in the promised land if I had not been in the wilderness. In the wilderness, God grew me up. In the wilderness, God shaped me. In the wilderness, God gave me some of the most precious things that even the promised land can't give. Let's imagine that Loretta Lynn had grown up, probably like her own children, in a house full of wealth, in a house of comfort, in a house of plenty. Loretta Lynn's daughters might grow up singing her song, but they didn't live her song. What does Loretta never forget about that country house? The love of her parents, which is exactly what Deuteronomy is saying. I brought you into the desert so that you could see me, so that you could know me, so that you could learn to trust me. Because if you would ask Loretta Lynn, what means more to you? Your fame, your wealth, your status, or the love that you experience from your parent? I say, if you talk to Loretta Lynn's therapist, they would probably say if she didn't have the love of the parents, no matter how much money she had later, she'd forever be in therapy. Why does God bring us into the wilderness? Does it mean He doesn't love us? Does it mean He has abandoned us? It feels that way. And even when we're in the wilderness, we grab whatever we can to try to make life work and to try and make things feel better. But God brings us to the place where we realize He is what matters. It's His love that matters. I've told you the story before of Mabel. It's in a John Ortberg book, where this pastor is going through a nursing home. He's visiting someone else and finds this woman horribly disfigured in a hallway that reeks of urine, and almost passes her by, and she says something to him that makes him stop, and he visits with her, and he expects her to sit down and whine and complain to him about, oh, this nursing home is horrible, and my family never visits, and I'm horribly disfigured by cancer, and I'm terrible pain, and he sits down by the woman, and she instead gives him this flower that she's holding and says, I want you to have this. This flower is beautiful, but I can't see it or smell it. And he begins talking to her, only to discover that this woman is not in misery, but is in joy in this crappy nursing home, because what she has is Jesus' love. And it sounds sappy, it sounds strange, but this is the kind of character and love that wilderness can create that affluence seldom does. And so the words are twofold this morning. On one hand, if you're in the wilderness, hang on. Look for manna. Look for the ways in which He's sustaining you, even if He's failing your expectations in many ways. And the other hand, if you're not in the wilderness now, if life is good and there's breakfast on the table every morning and there's a roof over your head and things are good, remember the wilderness. Remember that what you have is a gift. Even your ability to make wealth is a gift from God. and remember where you came from, so that you may live in the promised land with the values of the wilderness. Let's pray. Lord, the wilderness is so often much easier to handle in memory, because when we're in the midst of it, we're in pain, and we're in fear, and we're in panic, and we're willing to throw you off as quickly as we're willing to throw anything off. But most often, Lord, you box us in, and you call us to yourself. And in the wilderness, you teach us, and you mold us, and you shape us, and you make us ready for the promised land. May we, Lord, rest in you. May we, Lord, put our hope in you. And if we're in the wilderness, give us the strength to endure and the power to see through the clouds to know that the suffering is only for a short time. And if we're in the promised land, may we remember our trials and our temptations in the wilderness, and may we hold them fast so that the power of the promised land, the corruptions, do not change us, so that we may actually fully enjoy all of your gifts when they come to us. Hear our prayer. In the name of Jesus, amen.